Before a child learns who they are, they learn where they belong. According to Jung, the psyche is shaped first by adaptation. Long before we develop personal values, dreams, or ambitions, we develop survival strategies. Ways of remaining connected to the people and systems that keep us emotionally and physically alive. For a child, belonging is not optional. It is existential. To belong means to be protected, to be fed, to be seen, to survive. So the psyche learns a simple but powerful rule. Do not risk exclusion. This rule does not disappear with age. It sinks into the unconscious and becomes part of identity. This is why outgrowing your family can feel dangerous, even when nothing overtly bad is happening. Because psychologically, growth threatens belonging. When a child grows up in a family marked by struggle, sacrifice, or limitation, they learn more than circumstances. They inherit emotional contracts. Unspoken agreements such as, we don't have more than this. We don't get ahead. We endure. We stay together by staying the same. These contracts are never discussed, but they are felt deeply. They form an invisible boundary around identity. Jung understood that the psyche does not evolve by logic alone. It evolves through emotional safety. So when a person begins to change, to succeed, to stabilize, to think differently, the unconscious does not immediately ask, is this good? It asks, is this safe? And safety is measured by belonging, not by potential. Outgrowing your family does not only mean changing circumstances, it means risking emotional separation. It means becoming unfamiliar. It means breaking the mirror through which you were once recognized. This is why growth can trigger guilt, not because you are doing something wrong, but because the psyche associates difference with danger. Many people confuse this guilt with morality. They believe, if I feel guilty, I must be betraying something sacred. But guilt, in this context, is not ethical. It is relational. It is the fear of being emotionally orphaned. Jung wrote that individuation, the process of becoming oneself, always involves a symbolic death. Not the death of others, but the death of who you were required to be in order to belong. This is why growth feels lonely even before it actually is. The psyche anticipates loss before loss occurs, so it resists. It creates hesitation, self-doubt, delays, self-sabotage. Not because growth is wrong, but because remaining the same once kept you connected. Outgrowing your family does not mean rejecting them, but psychologically it can feel like abandoning the shared identity that once held you together. And the unconscious is loyal to what once worked. This is why people often stall right at the edge of expansion. They can imagine success, they can desire freedom. But when it begins to materialize, something tightens. A question emerges beneath awareness. If I change, will I still be loved? This question is never answered rationally. It is answered emotionally, through anxiety, guilt, or fear. Jung believed that when we fail to become conscious of these inherited loyalties, we live them out blindly. We mistake unconscious obedience for character. We call stagnation loyalty. We call fear humility. But what is actually happening is that the psyche is choosing belonging over becoming. This choice is not weak. It is human. Belonging comes before freedom. And until this truth is acknowledged, growth will always feel dangerous. Not because it is harmful, but because it asks the psyche to survive without the old guarantees. The first step, then, is not rebellion. It is understanding. Understanding that the fear you feel is not proof that you are doing something wrong. It is proof that you are crossing an invisible boundary your psyche once believed it could never cross. When growth begins to threaten belonging, the psyche does not respond with logic. It responds with guilt. Guilt is one of the most misunderstood emotions. Many people assume guilt means wrongdoing. But psychologically, guilt often signals a perceived rupture in relational bonds. It is not about morality. It is about separation. When you begin to outgrow your family, you are not only changing your circumstances, you are changing the emotional contract that once defined your place within the system. And the system reacts, not always outwardly. Sometimes the reaction happens entirely within you. You may notice thoughts like, I shouldn't want more. I don't want to make them feel bad. They struggled, so who am I to have it easier? If I change too much, I'll lose connection. These thoughts feel ethical. They sound compassionate. But underneath them lies fear. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of being resented, fear of being alone. The unconscious equates sameness with safety, difference with danger. So when your identity begins to shift, the psyche sounds an alarm. This is why success can feel heavy, why stability can feel undeserved, why joy can feel suspicious. The guilt you feel is not proof that you are betraying your family. It is proof that your nervous system still believes love depends on similarity. Families do not only transmit values, they transmit emotional roles. The responsible one, the struggling one, the caretaker, the one who stays small, the one who sacrifices. These roles maintain balance. They keep the system predictable. When you outgrow your role, the system destabilizes, and the unconscious fears that destabilization will cost you love. So it pulls you back, not through force, but through emotion. Guilt is one of the strongest emotional regulators. It keeps you in place without anyone having to say a word. This is why many people remain loyal to suffering long after it is necessary. They confuse endurance with virtue, limitation with humility, self-denial with love. But love that depends on self-erasure is not love. It is attachment disguised as morality. The psyche does not ask, "Oh, is this healthy?" It asks, "Will this keep me connected?" And connection once meant survival. This is where outgrowing your family feels most dangerous, not because your family is malicious, not because they want to hold you back, but because your growth threatens the emotional equilibrium you once shared. Even if your family encourages you outwardly, your unconscious may still resist inwardly. Because encouragement does not erase conditioning, you may find yourself minimizing success, downplaying progress, avoiding visibility, sabotaging momentum, not consciously, but reflexively. The psyche is trying to solve a dilemma. How do I become more without losing where I come from? If that question is not addressed consciously, the unconscious chooses the safest option. It chooses belonging over expansion, and it does so silently. This is why many people live lives just below their potential, close enough to dream, far enough to avoid separation. They are not afraid of success. They are afraid of what success represents. Difference, distance, independence. Outgrowing your family does not mean abandoning them. But psychologically, it requires accepting that you may no longer be mirrored in the same way. You may be loved, but not fully understood. Connected, but not identical. And for the unconscious, this ambiguity feels dangerous. So it clings to guilt as a way to stay anchored. The work is not to eliminate guilt, it is to understand it, to see it not as a moral signal, but as an emotional echo from a time when belonging meant survival. When this distinction becomes conscious, guilt loses its power to control behavior. It becomes information, not a command. And this is the beginning of true psychological freedom. According to Jung, the central task of adulthood is individuation. Individuation is not self-improvement, it is not achievement, it is not rebellion. It is the gradual separation from unconscious identifications that no longer reflect who you truly are. And this is where outgrowing your family becomes most psychologically threatening. Because individuation requires differentiation. To individuate means to become distinct without becoming disconnected, whole without being fused, autonomous without being hostile. But the psyche does not experience this process as clean or philosophical. It experiences it as risk. When you begin to individuate, you stop living primarily through inherited definitions. You question beliefs you never chose. You outgrow emotional roles you once occupied automatically. And this shift creates anxiety, not because something is wrong, but because the unconscious equates differentiation with abandonment. Jung observed that many people never truly individuate. They remain psychologically embedded in their family system, even when they are physically independent. They live out inherited destinies while believing they are making personal choices. This is not because they are weak. It is because separation was never made conscious. Outgrowing your family activates a deep fear. If I am no longer who they know, who am I allowed to be? This fear often appears as resistance to growth, as hesitation at critical moments, as an urge to return to what feels familiar. Not because the familiar is fulfilling, but because it is recognizable. The unconscious prefers what is known to what is authentic. Individuation demands that you tolerate being temporarily unmirrored. When you change, others may not immediately reflect you back. They may misunderstand. They may minimize. They may not know how to relate, even if they love you. This gap between who you are becoming and how others see you is deeply uncomfortable. So the psyche seeks relief. It considers retreat, self-sabotage, downplaying difference, returning to old roles. Because those roles came with certainty. Jung believed that the fear of becoming too different is one of the greatest barriers to psychological maturity. Not because difference is dangerous, but because it threatens the fantasy of eternal belonging. The truth is, no one individuates without losing something. Not necessarily relationships, but illusions. The illusion that love requires sameness. The illusion that belonging requires self-erasure. The illusion that loyalty means repetition. Individuation asks for a higher form of loyalty, loyalty to the truth of who you are becoming. This loyalty often feels selfish at first. It feels wrong. It feels isolating, because it is unfamiliar. But remaining psychologically fused comes at a cost. You may stay connected, but you will feel constrained. You may be loved, but you will feel unseen. You may belong, but you will feel divided. This internal division is one of the quietest forms of suffering. Outgrowing your family does not require confrontation. It requires clarity. Clarity about what you are carrying that does not belong to you. Clarity about what you are allowed to release without betraying love. Jung warned that when individuation is avoided, life becomes repetitive. The same conflicts reappear. The same ceilings are reached. The same frustrations resurface. Not because the world is limiting, but because the psyche is refusing to separate. True separation is not rejection. It is differentiation. It allows you to relate without losing yourself, to love without disappearing, to grow without hatred. But to reach this state, you must tolerate a period of uncertainty. A time where you are no longer fully who you were, but not yet fully who you are becoming. This liminal space is where most people turn back. Not because they cannot grow, but because they cannot endure being undefined. Outgrowing your family feels dangerous because it requires you to step into this undefined space without guarantees. But this space is where the self is born, and once the self begins to take form, the fear that once held you no longer controls you. It becomes a memory, not a boundary. Outgrowing your family does not end when you become aware of the pattern. Awareness opens the door, but integration is what allows you to walk through it. Jung understood that psychological maturity is not about cutting ties. It is about redefining them. The goal is not separation for the sake of independence. The goal is relationship without self-betrayal. This is where many people struggle. They believe the only options are stay the same and belong, or grow and lose everyone. But this is a false dilemma. True individuation creates a third path. A path where you no longer need approval to validate your becoming. A path where guilt no longer dictates your limits. A path where loyalty is no longer measured by how much you restrict yourself. Integration begins when you stop asking, will they still accept me? And start asking, can I accept myself if I don't grow? This question shifts everything, because at some point not growing becomes more painful than the fear of separation. Jung believed that neurosis emerges when the psyche is forced to live below its level of development. You can remain loyal to your past, but your future will protest. That protest appears as restlessness, depression, anxiety, a sense of being trapped in a life that no longer fits. These symptoms are not flaws, they are signals. They signal that the self is demanding expression. The work is not to silence these signals. It is to listen to them without turning them into rebellion. Integration means holding two truths at once. I love where I come from. I cannot stay who I was. This is not contradiction, it is maturity. When this inner permission is granted, something shifts. You stop performing loyalty. You stop shrinking to stay connected. You stop translating your success into guilt. Instead, you allow relationships to adjust naturally. Some will grow with you. Some will remain where they are. Some connections may loosen, others may deepen. This is not failure. It is not failure. It is differentiation in action. Jung warned that when people refuse to individuate, they often project their unlived life onto others. They resent those who grow. They criticize those who change. They moralize stagnation. Understanding this allows you to stop internalizing resistance that was never yours to carry. Outgrowing your family does not require permission. It requires responsibility. Responsibility to live truthfully. Responsibility to stop confusing love with limitation. Responsibility to end inherited patterns without turning them into blame. When you integrate this responsibility, abundance becomes possible. Not just financial abundance, but emotional and psychological abundance. Because you are no longer divided. You are no longer negotiating your worth. You are no longer hiding your expansion. You are no longer apologizing for becoming. Abundance stabilizes where identity is integrated. Jung understood this deeply. What is not integrated will sabotage expression. But what is integrated becomes support. Your past no longer pulls you back. It becomes ground beneath your feet. Your family no longer defines your limits. They become part of your story, not the boundary of your life. Outgrowing your family feels dangerous until the psyche realizes that survival no longer depends on sameness. Once this realization settles, fear dissolves. Not because growth becomes easy, but because it becomes necessary. You no longer ask, is it safe to grow? You ask, what happens if I don't? And at that point, the decision is no longer driven by fear. It is driven by truth. This is the quiet power of individuation, not separation, but wholeness, not rejection, but evolution. And this is where growth stops feeling dangerous and starts feeling inevitable.